Anthropologists argue that humans have historically privileged humans as the center of all significance, but this is not an innate disposition, but a historical outcome of a distorted humanism that foundations human freedom on the unfreedom of human and animal others. The humanist aspiration to ground knowledge in reason through modern science has undermined the tenability of a human-animal binary and hierarchy, leading to a critique of speciesist beliefs and institutions. Critical animal theory scholars, including post-humanists and feminists, re-evaluate the significance of dependencies, emotions, and the specificity of animal being and agency. They aim to dismantle the structures of speciesism at the politico-economic, socio-cultural, and psychosomatic levels of existence. Carnism, the unrecognized ideology that legitimates the killability and edibility of animal other beings, is arguably the deepest and most perverse cultures. Vegan praxis is one means of hegemony of speciesist institutions and human-animal binary and hierarchy. Anthropocentrism is more than the consequence of privileging humans' knowledge and values. It is a belief system, ideology of human supremacy that advocates privileging humans and those who approximate humanity. It functions to maintain the centrality and priority of human existence by marginalizing, subordinating non-human perspectives, interests, and beings. Anthropocentrism assumes various forms, such as a human-animal dualism or continuum. Humanism, coined in the 19th century, can be used anachronistically to characterize ideological and cultural movements from antiquity to modernity. Humanism was an unpopular belief system in Europe until interest in classical texts, pedagogy, and independent inquiry were renewed during the Italian Renaissance. During the 18th century Age of Enlightenment, humanism reduced the religiosity of the Renaissance and broadened its project to the utopian ambition of universal human progress through rational inquiry, the demystification of the natural world, and the self-authorization of the nation-state, i.e., democracy. In the last half-century, modern science has generated numerous studies that conclude that human exceptionalism and the human-animal dichotomy are untenable. Non-humans, from ants to apes, demonstrate that capabilities previously thought to be exclusive to humans are actually shared with others. Contemporary scholars like Franz de Waal characterize the stigmatization of anthropomorphism as anthropodenial, the willful blindness to the human-like characteristics of animals, or the animal-like characteristics of ourselves. The anthropocentrist commitments of some scholars have prompted them not to concede these capabilities to animal others, but rather to redefine them, especially language. The boundary project of delimiting the human from the animal has been in a steady retreat since the 1970s, and will likely continue so long as humans presuppose themselves as an exclusive class, in which what is essential to and valuable about humanity is defined by what all animal others lack. The anthropological machine and hegemonic centrisms have led to the redrawing of an ontological and ethico-political boundary that risks casting out members of the human species. This includes the violence in the creation humans not only from themselves, but also from fellow creatures who co-intensify all non-human sentient life. The concept of humanity has been selectively selected to a particular form of embodiment of humanity, reflecting a particular form of themselves in opposition to those the animals, women, foreigners, disabled people. and slaves were considered unfit to part in ancient Greece. In modern times, claims about the natural equality of all mankind called forth equally global assertions about natural difference, which inadvertently opened the door to more virulent forms of sexism, racism, and anti-Semitism. In the present, Western societies colonize other lands and minds, conforming them to the West's own image of the human. Many people of non-European descent continue to be either culturally assimilated into Western civilizations or be managed by it, if such people have not already been exterminated for interfering with human progress and freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre warned of a humanist theory that takes man as an end, and as the supreme value. Anthropologist humanism is a logical outcome of the production of subjectivities that negate others, leading to the injustices against humans and animals. This hegemonic centrism intersects with other centrisms such as androcentrism and ethnocentrism, operating through a self-referencing conceptual system of positional dualisms. Matthew Colacco, 2008, argues that anthropocentrism should be the primary target for critical theory, as it is always one version of the human that falsely occupies the space of universal and ethical and political consideration. Humanism can retain its core reason and freedom without defining an animality. It can recognize differences by attending to their moral limits and insisting that humans and all other categories are equal, regardless of their species classification. However, speciesism is the most pervasive ideological form of the Western world. Feminist and post-humanist anti-speciesists criticize the ontology and epistemology of humanist moral and political philosophy, believing that a radical transformation in thought and politics is necessary to challenge the dominant ways of conceptualizing humans, animals, and morality at the root of the world's problems. Post-humanist, postmodern, and radical feminist theory contest the universality of the assertive, atomistic, autonomous subject that is foregrounded and sustained only through the disavowal of the feminine vulnerabilities of embodiment, dependency, and affect. The liberal humanist subject is not a benign myth, but a foundational figure that dominating discourses and institutions are built upon. The myth of the autonomous subject both legitimizes the exploitation of women and others due to the cultural construction of women as partially autonomous, while also producing ignorance of the conditions that limit their autonomy and prop up inequity in leadership roles, and women's exhausted physical and emotional labor. Post-humanist and feminist critiques of the general subject challenge both manism and its moral rhetoric of right and utilitarian orientations. They extend moral consideration in their own terms but in correspondence, allowing a gender-neutral liberal human subject free to question the inconsistent application of the system, not the criteria, i.e., content. Rationality, rule-based ethics, and the marginalization of empathy are key concepts in post-humanist and feminist theorists' critiques of the autonomous humanist subject. They challenge the anthropocentric bias of liberal humanism and the need for a more strategic and pragmatic approach to understanding the complex relationship between humans and animals. The marginalization of the agency and experience of human and non-human animal bodies is a significant issue in humanist ethics. Humanist morality assumes that humans already have the right to grant moral status to others, which implies that humans have both the ability and authority to prejudge who counts morally and who does not. This deflection makes our own bodies mere facts, facts which may or may not be thought of as morally relevant. A moral theory that begins ethics with being a live animal body transfers the burden of proof to anthropocentrism to justify excluding animals from moral consideration. Rationality-based approaches to ethics tend to place the burden of proof on those advocating moral consideration for animals. The humanist methodology holds that the powerlessness one experiences in the face of suffering is a distance not only from the suffering animed. Emotions play a fundamental capability in ethics, but it does not preclude an attention to justice. The conditions of their existence, the structures of their oppression, and opposing those structures that exploit and marginalize their existence. Ecofeminist and post-humanists critique not only the human-animal dualism, but also the civilization-wilderness dualism that helps maintain it. They advocate, situating humans as ecologically embedded and embodied subjects of interspecies communities. Critical animal theory and post-humanist theory share commonalities, such as their critique of anthropocentrism, human exceptionalism, instrumental reason, and the transcendence of finitude and passions of embodiment. Both approaches are grounded on human-animal empirical and phenomenological evidence. Chauvinism, a militant and bigoted patriarch, insinuates that violence against human irrational prejudice, but fails to capture the institutional and discursive mechanisms that tie speciesism with other centrisms. Speciesism is not mere prejudice, but a within material institutions that govern the lives and interests of animals and cultural discourses that circulate misrepresentations of animal sacrifice. Carnism, a sub-ideology of speciesism that dichotomizes non-human animals into edible and inedible categorizations, and legitimates the exploitation and consumption of animal others, presents an apt case study of speciesism. Deconstructing carnism may enable us to make invisible naturalized and normalized practices and effects of speciesism visible objects to challenge and transform. Variant praxis, a counter-narrative and practice in which non-human beings are not viewed or treated as appropriate for human consumption, is perhaps the most effective and direct way to subvert the speciesist complex. Deconstructing carnism is a significant step in moving toward such a praxis. This final point reflects a central tenet of critical animal studies: that theoretical understanding must be grounded in and geared toward practical application to bring about real change in individual lives and cultivate a genuine shift in social consciousness. Carnism is an ideology that conditions people to eat certain animals, and it exists within a speciesist ethos and is structural and internalized, shaping individual attitudes and behaviors towards those animal others who are classified as edible. All carnistic institutions heavily use denial, which erases any responsibility for the denial, such as there is no problem, and there is no counter-narrative. Over the past few years, there has been a shift in cultural attitudes towards eating animals, particularly in parts of the affluent West. Neo-carnist narratives promote the fictions that not eating animals veganism is abnormal, unnatural, and unnecessary. However, neo-carnisms are portrayed as biased, and social movements do not grow along the demand for vegan praxis. Vegan praxis cannot replace the speciesist carnist complex without first exposing normalized practices and effects of these systems.